All right, testing, 1, 2. Oh, it's the holiday season. Miss Lily, you ready? Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. Well, I'm visiting my sister next week, so let the holiday games begin. Who knows? And of course, my favorite state, Florida, is at it again. Apparently, they put aside $1 million so they can sue the NCAA selection committee because they weren't chosen in the four playoff. So, good luck with that, Florida. A lot of stuff to talk about. So here's what's going on with COVID hospitalizations. I plotted this out for 21, 22, and 23. So the good news is each year the number of hospitalizations for COVID is going down. That is probably due to two things. One, the virus itself is less virulent, it causes less disease, and also more and more people have some immunity to it or its relationship. So that's all good. But the virus isn't gone. It's around. I know a lot of people who have been getting colds and testing and being positive for COVID. In fact, in the nation, 49% of all the wastewater sites right here are reporting either 100% or 200% increase in viral burden. So that's a lot. And this is interesting because we've been following the Houston wastewater, and it's going up. It's up to 157% of the level it was in 2020. But interestingly enough, if you think back a few months ago, we were seeing a surge in COVID in the wastewater around August and September. And it even got up as high as 340% of the level in 2020. And then it was going down for about a month or two. So I was telling you every week, Houston's looking good, Houston's looking good. Well, now it's going up slowly again. So we're sort of seeing what I think would be the normal winter kind of increase in virus burden. It was interesting that we did have that sort of peak in late summer. And what's driving it? The same variants, HV1 and EG5 are the two dominant variants. That hasn't changed. And as I showed you before, that's good. They're closely related. HV1 is a derivative of EG5. And so it's very small amounts of amino acid changes in the spike protein, completely expected as the virus replicates and mutates. But the good news, it's not a giant recombinant event. So on the COVID side, the virus is around. As long as you've been vaccinated and get your updated booster shot, you should be fine in terms of serious illness. You may get infected, but it's likely to be just like a summer, like a cold. But please, it's only if you're resistant and and are up to date on your vaccines. So we are, though, in the midst of the flu season. And so if you look at the changes, red is like high rates of flu in the United States. And this was just November 4th, just a month ago. And now November 25th, these are the data for November 25th. You can see how bright red it is in the southern states, Louisiana and California. It's a little bit up in New York City. To me, that's a little bit of a surprise because we usually associate flu with people going indoors in the colder weather, but where it's really hot right now is in the southern states. So I'm not sure exactly why that is. It's also true that the southern states have less vaccinated people, so it may be related to the amount of vaccine coverage. If you look at hospitalizations for flu, it is a completely age-dependent thing. So 85, 75, 65, you can see the older you are, the more likely you are to be hospitalized with influenza, which is one of the reasons why you need both your influenza vaccine, but also your Pneumovax, because the people who get hospitalized often have a complication of pneumococcal pneumonia. The good news is if you look at what's circulating in flu, you can see the big spike we're having, A here in yellow, influenza B in green. But if you look at the subtypes, H1N1, H3N2, and Victoria strain for B are all in the vaccine. So very, very good match this year. You have no excuse to not get your flu shot, except listening to the internet. If you look at RSV, we're also having a surge in respiratory syncytial virus. This is where we were November 15th. of 22. So you can see where our peak was. Here we are again, November 5th, 2023. So not only is flu peaking now, but RSV is peaking. And we talked about the Texas TEFI data, which is about 80% of the coverage of wastewater in the state of Texas, a really great program running in combination with the School of Public Health at the University of Texas, but also Baylor College of Medicine doing the sequencing. And we sort of blast sequence all the viruses, everything that's in the wastewater. And you can see very nicely influenza A peak, influenza B peak, and RSV. What's interesting is, as I sort of mentioned, we had that peak in SARS-CoV-2 before, and now it's just beginning to go up again. So you can see that also reflected in the wastewater. So just a couple of interesting papers this past week that I thought would be fun to review. One I think is really interesting. It's not definitive, but it's really interesting. It's looking at HLA and its association with asymptomatic patients. So at least 20% of individuals we know with SARS remained asymptomatic. And that was one of the real problems with this pandemic, is if people are symptomatic, they can isolate, but so many of the people were asymptomatic. And so this was a study in 30,000 individuals, and they found 1,400 or so that were unvaccinated and got infected and had no symptoms. And what they did was look at their HLA subtype. So HLA is human leukocyte antigens. These are cell surface proteins that regulate immune recognition. And so there's a bunch of different subtypes. And what they found is one subtype in particular, if you carried that particular subtype on your lymphocytes, you were more likely to have asymptomatic infection. And what was interesting is if you had one copy, you were 20% less likely, or 20% more likely to be asymptomatic. But if you had two copies of the gene, you were 8 times more likely to be asymptomatic. So here's a very good genetic explanation of why there were some people who were asymptomatic. And what the data suggested was that these particular lymphocytes were able to recognize SARS-CoV-2 because of its relationship, in close relationship to other coronaviruses that the patient probably hadn't recognized. So that is, I think, the first real insight into why there might be an immune basis or a genetic basis even for the asymptomatic individuals. So one other big issue is that what are the consequences of a lot of this anti-science and anti-vaccine besides people not getting vaccinated? Well, that's the big deal, because right now, if you look at between 2019 and 2023, the number of kindergartners that are entering with their expected vaccine coverage has dropped from about 95.5% to about 93%. Exemption rates across the country have gone up by 3%. In 41 states, exemptions are exceeding 5% of the patient population. And that puts a huge amount of risk on kids going to school. There are 36 states that are below the measles, mumps, rubella coverage threshold of 95% for kindergartners. And so, and the lowest state is Idaho. So we're going to pull out, you remember the R number? We talked about that. That's the number of people you infect in a susceptible group. If you're infected, how many people do you infect? Flu isn't all that infectious relative to like measles. You know, it's between 1 and 2 R number, closer to 2. So if you look at herd immunity, which is where we tried to get, the herd immunity calculation is 1 minus 1 over R0. And so if you're looking at flu, the goal is to get to about 50% immunity. We know the vaccine is only 70% effective, so the public health departments want to get to about 70% of coverage to reach a herd immunity. And we're nowhere near that with flu right now. But when you think about measles with an R number, the highest R number of 18, you have to be over 95% protected before you have an outbreak. Well, right now, we have about 40 states that are under the 95%. And so I can guarantee you that we will start having measles outbreaks, which is it's really a direct consequence of this irrational response about vaccines. And there's a real concern worldwide. There have been large or disruptive outbreaks in over 37 countries with measles. And the concern is that as the vaccination rates drop, not just for SARS-CoV-2, but people are not getting MMR, vaccines, then there's going to be measles outbreaks. So those are really sort of interesting products of what's happened in the world of COVID. So I want to end today with a bunch of shout-outs. First of all, I want to congratulate the 85 graduates of the School of Health Professions. They received their degrees December 2nd. We graduated 32 new physician assistants, 27 doctors of nurse practice, 23 orthotics and prosthetic graduates ready to go into the healthcare profession. We need them, so get to work. I also want to point out that we have a new collaboration. Our Center for Space Medicine and the Translational Research Institute, that we call TRISH, has signed a collaboration with the Australian Antarctic Division to better understand human resilience and behavioral health in remote and isolated environments resembling the challenges of spaceflight. So the Australian Antarctic Division research stations have small crews of 14 to 30 people living in Antarctica during the winter, where they're isolated from friends and family, largely cut off from the outside help. Sounds like a family gathering at Christmas at the Klotman home. And they leave them there and see if they eat each other. Anyway, it's an interesting experiment, and we're doing it with, Trish is doing it with the Australian Antarctic group. And finally, I want to say Happy Hanukkah to everybody. This is a tradition. You light the menorah. It's called the Festival of Lights. For those of you who cared, Judah the Maccabee, after his victory, went into the temple, went to light the candle or the menorah, and it turns out he had only oil for one day, but it burned for 8 days, which is why we give 8 not as good presents as people get on Christmas Day. I was always angry about that. Anyway, to my Jewish colleagues, Happy Hanukkah. Anyway, I hope you have a great weekend, and I can't wait to see you next week.